Funnel down into Hamilton, and I haven't been here for a couple weeks. We've chosen Seeing Grey by Adam Hamilton, and I don't quite know where we're at because the books were sort of in my office, then in a box to hand out. I don't know where we're at with reading, so I'm gonna.
We can tell you.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna sort of give us an intro into it, and then we'll see how far we get into the book. This topic. It's interesting to me that you all were interested in this book because I feel like I talk this way a lot, and so I think it's things that I think that's things that you hear from me quite a bit. The way I want to sort of enter into it is having read the first chapter of this. Hamilton will talks a lot in the first chapter about influences of his that are either or, like he'll say, I went to Oral Roberts University. He labels that as a more conservative place. And then he'll say, but I wanted to go to a seminary for a different degree that was a little bit more progressive. And so he'll talk about different religious preachers or leaders that are on either side of the. One of the things that I want to enter into the book as we all sort of get on the same page is, people, they don't openly say it, but they sort of come to me when I talk like he talks in this chapter, and they say, well, you're kind of being passive. They don't really say it that way, but they're kind of saying, when you're saying you're not this and you're not that, you're kind of just saying, whatever happens around me is okay. So I want to enter into this by telling you that is not what I'm telling you. And what we talk about in the coming weeks is not this like, oh, we just pick whatever we want and whatever approaches me. I think the thing that's important for me, and it won't be as important to you probably, I say I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, I'm a Lutheran. That's the way I try to say this. It doesn't mean that I don't spend a lot of prayer and a lot of time and a lot of thoughtfulness over that certain approach. It means that, I am registered with a certain party to vote. It means that when I say I'm a Lutheran, it means that if my party says this is the way we're voting in this election, I don't necessarily say okay. I sometimes will say, well, that one I don't feel good. I don't really just roll. Now, people have looked at me and said, well, you're just sort of, they don't say it this way, but they'll say, well, you're just kind of doing what you want then. It's still an active engagement of who you are and who God makes you and what you believe. It's just not the prevailing ones that we see on different news stations all the time. Does that all sort of make sense? So I wanted to give this sort of warning here that this is not like me trying to switch your party or get you to just sit back and let it be like, well, whatever. Lutherans are accused of cheap grace, that we just take God's love and then sit back and say, well, God will handle it. That is not really what I'm saying. It may sound like that at times, but that is not what I'm saying. I think we have to be proactive. So some of you have read Adam Hamilton's first chapter. The question in the book that he asks us to think about is growth and where we've gone through moments of growth. Have you all? Don't answer this one all the way, but like, I have someone in my family who, for all the years of my growing up, was very clearly part of one party, and now is part of the other party, has switched. So where have you experienced a sort of growth, or it doesn't have to be political, but you can say, have you ever had a moment where your mind changed on something?
Mm-hmm.
What causes these mind changes?
Depends on the situation.
Well, you just answered it. It's what's happening to you will sometimes impact you in such a way that your mind changes. I've told you all this story before. Ethan is close to graduating from college, but in middle school I dropped him off one day, and there was a kid at school who brought a gun in and shot himself in the head in the bathroom, intending to shoot other people. And then you come to, I'm at church, I'm a person who's now gone through this as a parent, and you come to church and you're like, well, if I start talking about gun control, everybody's going to be like, well, he's rolling out the progressive stuff again. We had a story as we did prayer requests that had to do with gun. We have to be able to, I think, find a way to enter into a conversation about people who deal with things like this without just making it political. And we have to be open to growth no matter which side of these situation we're in. Why do we have to be open to the growth? Because there's painfulness and there's issues that people are dealing with. So I think when I say I'm Lutheran, I'm trying to not be passive, but actively move past just making this a Fox News versus CNN conversation. When I try to talk to people about it, I know that's important to people, but I'm trying to go to a different place often than that. So I don't know if anything and all that you want to talk about, or if you want to enter into that. I am in the business of thinking about how people are challenged by things in their life and how they grow and how they change. All of us have had to do it. We've all had to grow. We've all been in relationships that were hard to, we had to change to stay in it, or we were changed because we didn't stay in the relationship. We've all had physical things happen that make us change our habits or change opinions. I think one of the things that scares me the most about where we are as Americans is that we seem really afraid of even entertaining the idea of going against party. No matter which party we're in, both parties seem really opposed to, well, maybe we should think about this. Like, we seem real rigid. Like we take ourselves so seriously we won't move off of it.
It makes for a battleground then.
Yeah, because we won't see it. There's a lack of humanity there when you won't grow anymore.
Or when you won't listen to someone who differs from you. You used the term when we were of sitting with someone and listening with them. You may not agree with them, but it's always good to let them, if they can tell you in a respectful manner that I hear what you're saying, but I don't agree with you. And then give them a reason why, and they give their reason of why they are. It doesn't mean that you're going to change your mind, but you grow as a person through that because you respect that, as long as it's not shooting through a front window or trying to find a violent way to get an answer. We have, and this was sort of I only read through, I think, chapter 2. It's always like, well, if you're Roman Catholic, we know this is what you think. Not necessarily. Or if you're Lutheran, we know exactly what you think. Or if you're Baptist, or if you're that. You know what? I sat with my doctor, who I did not know is also a Lutheran. She attends Redeemer in Cuyahoga Falls. She was raised Missouri Synod, so that's where she and her family have gone. And it's amazing, as I talked with her, she said, I know I'm going to meet Baptists in heaven. I said, me too, and there'll be a few Presbyterians thrown in and all of these others. We forget that we may differ in doctrine, but it's the faith. It's the faith that's important. How we express that faith sometimes is very different. I feel very comfortable in the Lutheran Church because I've always been in the Lutheran Church.
I'm a Lutheran pastor, so I have a simultaneous obligation to you all. You know, you all call a pastor, but I'm called. The simultaneous, like, I have to figure out how to do it, is to teach Lutheran doctrine. I have to tell you, well, this is what, and I have to know that I may not even, like, someone might know better than I do and be like, well, you just said that the way you shouldn't have. But I also have to be like, well, not everybody here is going to be Lutheran, is not going to be 100% adhering to all these doctrines you're trying to teach people. So it doesn't mean I don't believe the doctrine. It means that I don't test you on it, right? I don't say, well, to come up to communion today, you better be able to understand what Lutheran thing we learned. So that's a simultaneous obligation to teach the doctrine, but also be in conversation about where I need to do it differently, or where you all say, hey, maybe I don't like that, right? Remember, I talk about Lutherans all the time as both and I'm not going to read it now, but I brought an older article from Living Lutheran that talks about both and what that means, which I'm going to give you all the sort of, when you go he's got this first chapter where there's a lot of this either or, like, and he's got good, and I might want to talk about it some, definition, not good, but discussion worthy, conversation worthy definitions of conservative and progressive in here, which we can talk about. But he's got these sort of, he's ping-ponging between the either or, and that's that sort of both and he sort of talks about that in chapter 1. This book gives us, the first question it gives us here is, why are faith and faithful people essential to the political process? Why are faith and faithful people essential to the political process? Remember all the stuff we've talked about. I say I'm Lutheran more than Republican or Democrat. Why is that essential? As people of faith, why do we think that perspective is essential to the political process? I'll let you try to answer it, but then before I try to keep going on, why is faith essential to what we're seeing with all our news and all our votes and all of our stuff?
Gives you hope.
That's true. It tries to be less cynical. I mean, I fight myself because the older I get, the more cynical I get. I'm going to be, we've talked about a man called Owen Curmudgeons before. I'm a practicing curmudgeon. I'm trying hard not to be one. But I think faith, even though like so much of the scripture is apocalyptic, it's always saying, well, that's God's work for betterment that God's do. Even though it's scary stuff, we're hopeful that God's doing something great with it. Death is always with resurrection. So hope is part of it. I think it's also because I think faithful people have a thicker skin or a better preparation to sit in with people no matter which party they're in. So if I'm somewhere and someone is not my party, I'm still interested in care, that they know how God works. I understand instantly that whoever that person is and I are going to have some not aligned things, but I'm still interested in care. I'm still interested in law and gospel for me and them, growth for both of us. I need to learn God's law, and I'm betting the other person does too. Mm-hmm. And I think faith's important because it kind of leaps past some of that stuff that we're stopping short on and giving up too soon. Like it tries to be hopeful and say, well, something might happen if I sit in here, which you talked about sitting in.
Mm-hmm. I like that term, sitting in with somebody. And you've used that a lot during Lent. And it's a respect for that other person. As a human being, you may not always agree with them, but you can still respect them. And there are common grounds you can find with people all the time if it's not, it's my way or the highway. That's an old term that I heard for years and years,
Yes.
especially from men in administration as opposed to women.
Absolutely.
You know, it's my way or the highway. You know, well, I'm sorry, I guess I'm gonna start the journey. Because I can't agree right now. Now, there's other things I could agree, maybe with, but not everything. And that's kind of how I see our political climate on both sides, both major sides. It's our way, there's a right way, your way
And there's
is
no
the wrong
other way.
And there's, or we've lost, we don't know what way. With faith, we know the direction we're going in.
I think both political parties try to use the government to do things that only God can do. You know, they try to convict other people of sinfulness, or both parties do it equally. They both try to enact laws that'll make the other people behave the way they want. That's God. That's supposed to be God's work. And so part of the reason that we need to sit in and be faithful is because we're trying to use politics to do something that's it's not really its job, or it's not really the way it works.
Well, didn't the Pharisees try to do that with their, how many? I always forget how many rules they ended up having.
Yeah, I've heard that number. I've heard that number so many times. I
It's
don't know.
just billions, these
Yeah.
large number of rules. They could always find a rule that you broke.
The simultaneous call of a pastor is, I'm supposed to know the rules of being Lutheran, and I'm not. I feel like I know them pretty well. Obviously, I have to keep learning, but it's knowing those, and also knowing that isn't where people might start on the problem that they're talking to you about. Mm-hmm. And how do you deal with both things at once? As a Lutheran. As Lutherans growing up, you probably had pastors who told you what it was you had to believe, and if you didn't hit the standard, you weren't Lutheran. You didn't commune. You didn't confirm. You didn't. That's the equivalent of the Lutheran equivalent of my way or the highway.
Mm-hmm.
I always try to keep in mind a saying that my college professors put in our brain, and that is, there's nothing worse than a closed mind. Nothing can get in, and anything that gets out has been pre-programmed.
Why do people gravitate, this is a question from this book, it's sort of on the tail end of what you just said. Why do people gravitate to the black and white answer?
It's easier.
Yeah.
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 To me,
more
it's
comfortable.
easier.
Yeah,
It's more
easier.
comfortable, and then I don't have to be open to change. I know what the answer is. The answer is thus and so. Or you are wrong on that answer. This is the real answer. I think it takes a lot more courage, a lot more faith, and a lot more love to live in that gray area.
It's infinitely more stressful.
It is.
The reason why we gravitate toward black or white is because I use this word anxious, and I think I try to use it a way different than we hear it per se. But there's always anxiety. Everybody's life produces anxiety. This morning, today, the anxiety, you all have it. There's something you need to get done. There's something you have going on. There's something that stresses you. And they're individual things. What happens if you gravitate toward black or white, you feel like, hey, this is the way I'm going to relieve that stress. It's just, this is how it's going to be, and that's going to... When we interact with other people, their anxiety, our anxiety means double anxiety. And so we just gravitate toward these simple answers that don't actually fit what we're sitting there with. Mm-hmm. Because, and I talked about this is the theme that I tried to hit, especially in the back pew things of Lent. Faith is not simple. God did not design being faithful to just be here's the set of answers, you do this, you're set. It's designed to live in an engaged way with other people, and that creates anxiety. And this was never a promise to be simple. It was a promise to know how to be able to be led into how to do it better. It was never a promise that it was going to solve everything. the reason why we have anxiety, I think this is a very Lutheran thing, I have to say. The reason why we have anxiety is it reminds us that we have to look to something else for relief, care, support. And Luther would talk about being driven back to Christ. That we're being driven, when we sit with people and it's stressful and we need help, it drives us back to prayer, dependence on the Holy Spirit, Christ. That being driven is not a feeling we like. We don't like being driven back to something other than a black or white answer. You all know that I've had an unexpected month, I would say here. It drives you back to having to be like, okay, I'm gonna have to learn here. I don't have any choice. And no sooner will you learn something than you find out the next day what you learned may not even have been any good, and you have to learn it. Or you find out a year later something else happened, and what you learned that's the anxiety. It sits with all of us. But we have to be mindful of how easy it is when we give a black or white answer. What are we actually doing? We're short-circuiting the drive back to God, back to Christ. When we say, yeah, I'll be right there. When we know that there's an easy answer, we're short-circuiting praying, caring, going back to Christ for the answer. We've sort of shortcutted ourselves. And we do that because it saves ourselves energy.
I think there's a lot of pride involved in being black and white. When I was a supervisor at Western Reserve, I had a very staunch Baptist. He was a Baptist Bible church from up in Macedonia, nurse that came to work at our church or at our hospital, and Ted and I went up to go to their church for a service, and their pastor was the most obnoxious. He gave the most obnoxious sermon I have ever heard in my life. It was absolutely obnoxious. And Paul and I talked about what he said, and I let him know what I thought. And it was nothing but spiritual pride that motivated what he said in that sermon. I could not believe it.
Pride is if somebody asks you what is sinfulness, so if I'm asked that question, often the way I enter into that is I start just talking about prideful. It's certainty that we have it figured out, or that we're able to take care of ourselves, and to some degree we are able to take care of yourselves. All of us got ourselves here today. We got ourselves up, dressed, to the place. So there is some sense of accomplishment, but if you sit with somebody and you start to hear problems or think about your own problem, you know that pride is part of life humbles us to drive us back to Christ himself. Backs go out, and that humbles us to say, well, I can't do that. I have to be prayerful. I'm going to have to grow here. Adam talks about in the first chapter, not the introduction, into the first chapter, that people like progressive think about justice, and they just want to take care of, but they don't feel like they're beholding to any set of rules. They just want to be justice. And then conservative is to be really clung to a bunch of rules, but you're not always really good at taking that out somewhere. And he's trying to talk about doing both of those things, which I'm just going to tell you, is impossible to do properly. I'm a preacher, and when I hear people say, well, I've heard bad sermons, I think to myself, oh, geez, I know you've all heard bad sermons because I do it. I don't get up in the morning and say, I want this to be bad. You don't. No.
That's nice to know.
I actually, my anxiety is the opposite. I want this to be good. I want this to be good. I want this to be good.
Funny.
But at the end, I think the difference though is I hope that that people have a relationship, and so that we know that that isn't the totality of, that's not the a sermon isn't the totality of what makes a worshiping congregation or community faithful. It's part of it, but it's not all. And so, if it was dependent on attitude or right sermon, we'd be closed long ago, because I've been here too long for that to be right. It has to be more than that. That's what I mean when it's like we spend the first, sometimes more than half, talking about how we're in relationship with people. But I think the idea that he talks about wanting to pursue justice for people and be obedient to rules at the same time. It's impossible. We will never do it right. It's impossible for every sermon to be right. So I don't know, like maybe the next week the guy got up and the sermon was bad. I don't know. I know how it's impossible to do this, and it's, I think, why we have other people to talk it out, so that we grow with other people. You talked about talking to people afterwards, so you learned, strangely enough, you sort of had an interaction with that sermon, even though it was bad. Right? It still led to a conversation that led to some kind of affirmation of who you do want to be, if not that. Not that I say that I want to get up and preach a bad sermon to make everybody be something else, but I have gotten up before and given sermons that are like, this is how ridiculous. Like, I've been the devil to try to be like, don't do this, right? I've tried that. I think the other thing we need to be really careful of here is that it gets easy to be passive with this, which is the thing I started out by talking about. It's easy to just be like, well, if the sermon isn't really what matters for Sunday morning, then I don't need to spend any time on it. No, I never do that. I'm just saying it's easy to start to let your guard down, and you have to have a standard or a call that you're beholding to, and a belief that standard and call is not the end-all be-all, and you have to have them at both. That's hard. When you enter into a conversation with somebody, whether they're the same party or different party, you have to have some sense of what you think God's law is. But you also have to have some sense of God is love and grace. That's hard. It's very, very hard. You sit with someone who does something that is on your list of, well, that's God's law and they shouldn't be doing that, but you're still supposed to figure out how to be caring and communicating. That's not acceptable behavior. I mean, it's hard to do it. You've had situations where you've had to do that stuff. It's not easy. Towards the end of this week's sermon, I'm going to talk to you all about going places and sitting with people, and whatever it is that they do. Maybe they're of a different income level. Maybe they're of a different sexuality. Maybe a different, race. Maybe they have all. There's going to be things when you sit with those people that trigger the law ideas in your head. Do they also trigger They should be triggering both when you're sitting there. And it shouldn't just be triggering on the other person, like that pastor's that's that pride, like, I'm telling you, but I already have it figured out. It should be triggering it in you some too. Not just on them, but on you. That's hard. That's a lot to deal with when you're talking to people. I've long ago learned that people's brains can process way more than they think they can. Like when I spend the week praying and sort of saying this has to be good, part of what I'm thinking about is, well, people's brain, I don't have to say that line because people's brains can process that one. Like I only get 1,000 lines. I got to make good use of them. I'll cut this one because people's brains can process part of that. That's hard. It's hard. and you do it every day. You're doing it with kids, neighbors, grandkids, family, spouses. You're doing this interaction with people where your brains are trying to weigh every single day. Yeah.
When you said that about gun control, my knee-jerk reaction was, no, there was something wrong with that boy.
It's both.
It's mental illness. We've had guns, well, we did. I don't have guns anymore. But I grew up in a home where they hunted and fished, and that was the...
We had guns in our house.
Right. And if nobody's mentally ill, that gun doesn't get up and shoot somebody.
It's both things. It's both. I think it's... So what happened... And you don't have to agree with me here. I'm just laying it out there. You can be not happy with me. I think
can see both sides.
What happens with political parties is they tell you it's 100% mental health or it's 100% gun restriction.
No.
Right? But basically, I'm making that up to make a point. But parties basically will tell you it isn't really what it is both. I'm not.
That's that gray area.
Just stupid. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, there are probably, and people may not agree with me. It's fine. I believe that there are more guns available of types that don't need to be. I mean, I understand we live in America, and I understand why we want freedom, and we have militia ideas, and I understand a lot of that. But that a kid can get a gun is bothersome. But there is a reason why a kid who grabs a gun, they're trying to speak. They're trying to tell you. They're trying to voice something. And I would be careful on mental health. I would say it can also be emotional health. I would say it can be mental and emotional health. So,
Lots and lots of anger out there.
Right. So
young people.
I don't know. The kid who did this ultimately died, killed himself getting the gun out, I'm not happy that he killed himself. I'm happy in some ways that there weren't multiple deaths. Right. Which is just a weird thing to be saying out loud.
Right.
So we don't really know in that case if it was an emotional health, a mental health. I don't know that we really know. There was a lot of tell us about the family and what must have been going on. I think sometimes there's emotional, maybe both mental health, and sometimes it's a sort of depression. It can be an anger, which is an emotion. And there can be mental health, which is sometimes hereditary, sometimes, I am not going to be able to bat 1,000 with every kid that comes to church and fix every emotional health and every mental health. But I think our goal should be to be net positive on this stuff where we can. I'll try to explain what I mean by that again. We interact with people, they come into our lives, and they may be having any sorts of emotional strain, anxiety, I can't pretend that I am going to just get up, preach the world's most perfect sermon, and that anger issue for child A is now fixed. I can't pretend that by offering them communion, it's now fixed. I can hope and pray that it's closer to relief for that person than it was before they did it, before we did this together. I want to be I tell myself, try to be a net positive here. And then when I get the most mad at myself is when I don't feel like I've been a net positive. Like, hey, that interaction probably did more damage than good. That's not good. I get mad at myself when that happens.
But that's a good thing.
But so you want my goal is to be net positive. What I mean by that is I want this to move in the way that's relief, peace, God's presence, joy, strength, something that's a fruit of the Spirit. I want to move a tick that way by having been with this person, not a tick towards the stuff we know is the opposite of the fruit of the Spirit. Does that all sort of make... Now, I do not succeed 100% of the time, but that's what drives me back to Christ, to say I need help. If I'm going to be a net positive, I'm going to really need a lot of help. I don't succeed a lot because I get caught I'm not really ready. you know, like it's off the cuff or something, and I'm got something on my mind over here, and this one startles me, and then I'm like, leave me alone, I'm working on this, right? And now I know I have not been a net positive for that person who might have an anger thing, who I might have made it worse.
Sometimes you just have to love them. And it doesn't mean you agree with them.
You have to love yourself
And
too,
you love yourself.
which is not always easy.
That's right. You
I
love
talk about that on
yourself
Maundy
and
Thursday.
and you love them, but it doesn't necessarily change.
Why
but
do you?
your relationship with that person changes.
Why do you have to love yourself and the person you're interacting with? Why?
Because you cannot be abused either.
Because God does.
God does. Well, that's true.
Because
does.
God loves you and God loves that person. Now, it doesn't mean God sits up there and says, I'm thrilled that you're doing all that stuff today. I'm not saying I'm innocent. I'm saying I'm loved. Two different things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not calling you innocent. I'm calling you loved, though. You're loved. You're loved by God himself. And you're promised the Holy Spirit. And that promise means that you're enough. And you can be prayerful. Maybe net positive is not the way you want to talk about it, but we're trying to be prayerful of how we're a net positive, or you might have a different way of saying that. But I fall short of it a lot, and now I need patience with myself and other. I think that's a sort of entrance into this. I don't know what time we're at. We're right there. So I think that's an entrance into this. I know, you don't even have a book, so I know we're not all on the same page in the book.
I'll have it next week, right?
Next week I'll try. I'm gonna try. I think we're gonna try to talk about how he defines progressive and conservative, and sort of take off from there next week, which is in chapter 1. I know I'm being slow, but it's hard when we've all been on all sorts of different places. So that's in chapter 1. I'm going to leave these leader guides in here so that if you're ever to the point where like, what do we talk about with this chapter, you can just look it up there and you can have that guidance. There's two of them. If someone wants to take one, but I think we should leave one in here. These I don't remember how many I printed. This is the person who wrote it. His biographical information is on there. This appeared in Living Lutheran, and it's like a devotional this person wrote. I picked it because it talks about both and how Lutherans try to be gray, both and I thought it helps kind of enter into this a little bit. I'll try to get your book, and then we'll pick up on like mid chapter 1 next week, so we're all sort of in the same place. Would anybody like to close with prayer for us?